Hey everybody, it is your professor, your coding friend, and your missing puzzle piece, and today we're going to be talking about responsive websites. So first things first, go to Canvas, open up the link, make sure you're logged in, make sure you hit remix, and go into settings to change the name to something that makes sense to you. And you're ready to go. So responsive websites are when a website changes its style depending on the size of the device that's being used to access it. So we're talking about making something mobile friendly and desktop friendly and tablet friendly all within the same website and making sure that all the content still looks good. So we've done a little bit of responsive design before. When we use viewer width or viewer height, we are making sure that our designs adjust based on the width of whatever device they're using. So here, 90 VW refers to 90% of the screen width. And so that could be a screen that is a desktop or a screen that is a phone. And so no matter what it's on, it's going to always be a percentage of that device. And so it's responsive. Min and max also help with that. So we say that, say a text box can get so long, a maximum of so much width, before the text becomes hard to read, and we don't let it get any further than that. Same thing with min width. We don't let a text box get below a certain width so that it's still readable no matter what device it's on. It won't squish it to the point of illegibility. We also talked about responsive design in Flex and Grid. So there's settings inside of Flexbox and CSS Grid that will allow content to stretch or shrink depending on its container. And so that's another way that you can adapt content to different sizes. So first up, we're going to change the width in our body from pixels to VW so that it's responsive. And then we're going to change our min width, and I'll show you why as we're working on it. Okay, so for this one, I'm working on the desktop version right now. So I'm going to go over to these three dots and hit open a new window. And that way I can get a preview of what it would actually look like when a user is on it and not this like tiny little preview in the corner. And this looks good right now, but if I change the size of the screen, it starts cutting off some of the text. And so I want to make it more responsive, so I'm going to go back into my code. I'm going to go into the body, and where it says pixels here, I'm going to change that to 80 VW, viewer width. And so if I go back and hit refresh, it's now 80% of the width of the screen, which looks really good, right up until it gets really tiny. And like about here, it starts to get like weird and hard to read. And so this is what's known as a breakpoint, where your design breaks down and it no longer works. So we know that our breakpoint is somewhere around this width here. So I'm going to go into my code and make sure that it doesn't get smaller than that. So I'm going to go here, and underneath my width, I'll say min dash width. And I'll say, I fussed around with it, and I found that about 1000 pixels is about right. And inside, if I come back here and hit refresh, it's still responsive. It'll still change with the size. But then once it gets to about here, it stops changing. And that way, it's responsive, but it doesn't like break the readability of the page. So we still have this problem here, where after I get it down small enough, it starts to clip off bits of the text. And so I protected readability, but now it's gonna look really terrible for mobile, because that's gonna be like a width of like here. So there's a way to work around that. So first things first, we need to put this inside of the head of our HTML document. So what this does is it keeps track of the scale of the monitor, or the scale of whatever is being used to view the website, the browser. And it will keep refreshing and say, hey, this is what the initial scale is, this is what the minimum scale should be, and it will keep updating that and sending that to your site, so when it's making these calculations, they're accurate. This is the version you should use. There's some older, outdated versions that will glitch up your code if you're not using the most up-to-date one, so I recommend using this. It'll be on the canvas, so just copy and paste the code from the canvas. I'm going to paste it from my own PowerPoint because I have that power. And we're going to go into dot head, just the head of our HTML document, and copy and paste it. So back in my code, inside the HTML, up here in the head, just anywhere, like here's good. I'll hit paste, and nothing's changing. It's just allowing more accurate data for keeping track of the size of the browser. Okay, so that allows us to use media queries. And what media queries do is they say, at this breakpoint that you have set, use different code. So it's alternative stylings for different types of devices. So you want your code to be as responsive as possible. You want it to use relative units. You want it to use VW or percent or REM. But then at a certain point, it's going to get too small and it might not work anymore. And at that point, you're going to want to add an @media query like we're going to have to do for our little diary, our little text page. So to use @media, you say @media, only screen, because you're accessing it with a screen, and then you're going to set some sort of control here. And what I've said is max width of 480. So for every screen that is 480 or below, it will use this code instead of the code above. So you code out the default above, you come down into here, and you provide the alternate code. And it will replace whatever code is being used above with this new code. So in my body, if I said font size was 16, and then in this @media, I said for things that are below 480, use this. Once my screen gets that small, it'll boop, turn that larger value into this smaller value. So we're going to change this up. We're going to use @media. In our CSS, I've already provided an @media tag for smaller screens. We're going to change it up so that it's our diary web page is accessible for mobile devices. And so I'm going to say that I want the font size to be 16. I want to swap the colors of the foreground and the background because I think on mobile, a dark version is more readable. And I'm also going to align the text center. There's a couple more we're going to do, but this is where we're going to start. Okay, so back inside my CSS, I'm going to go down here to my @media, and I'm going to make a new selector for body, or it's body, sorry, hold up. HTML. So I don't keep going back and forth. I'm going to take a picture of this super fast. All right, so I'm going to make a new selector for HTML because that's the thing I want to change. And so now, anything I put in here, if the screen goes below 480, it's going to replace whatever I have up here. So I'm going to change the font size to 16 pixels. So there we go. This preview over here is under 480, so it's going to show me the changes that I'm doing. I'm going to swap the colors, so color, and then up here in my HTML, my background color is this black with dark gray. And you see now it blends in with the background. I'm going to come in and take this other color and just swap them. Background dash color. There we go. So that looks pretty neat. Okay, we still have a couple of issues. We still have these 3 columns that are getting weird to make it hard to read. I'm also going to change the text alignment to center because that's going to work for my future designs. It still looks kind of terrible, but it will look better in a second when we add these other things. So the next thing we're going to change up is we're going to make a new body selector, and we're going to change the width to 75 viewer width. I want to have more margin on the mobile. And I'm going to change the min width to 200. So in the body, I'll make a new body. And I'm going to set the width to, did I say 75? Or did I say 70? I said 75, haha, memory. Okay. But here's the thing. Nothing changed. It's still the same viewer width. And that's because it's working off of this here, and I didn't replace min width. So if you don't update it, if you have a value up here, it's going to still run all of these values. And so I've replaced width to 75, but it's not running that right now. It's running min width. It's running this one, and I haven't replaced that. So it's still saying like, oop, it's below 1,000, so got to make sure that it's at least 1,000. So what I have to do is go down here and replace my min width with a new value, min dash width, and I'll give it something small. There we go. So now it actually is 75 viewer width, and it will only get so small that it's 200 wide. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to change up the column count. So here, the way I'm setting up these columns is this dot text. So I'm going to change it from 3 to 1, and that's going to be our last. And boop. There we go. So there's no columns on mobile. It's 75 viewer width. If I keep getting it smaller, it'll only go this small before it'll just stop, because then it's unreadable. And if I go larger than 480, it takes me back to my desktop version. So if I refresh here, it still looks exactly the same. But if I shrink the screen down to simulate mobile, this is what it will look like. Another way to simulate mobile without having to like just keep making your screen tiny is if you go to the screen inspector, which is F12 on your keyboard. You can go up here to the top corner and you'll see there's different devices you can click on. Boop. And it'll let you preview different devices. It's awesome. So right now I'm previewing an iPhone SE, but I can change it to an XR or a Pixel 5. And you can see how it looks on all of these different devices and decide if you need to change up any of your settings. So I can already see it would look pretty terrible in portrait mode on an iPad Air, and so I can go in and adjust my settings to work with that. Maybe make another ad media that works with this size here. So pretty dope. And to get rid of it, you just click that again, it goes back. Okay. So there's lots of things you can do with ad media. The one you'll use most often is the max width, and you'll just set those for your different breakpoints in your code to adjust the styling so it looks good at all those different sizes. But you can also set a range, so you can say like, I want this style to work for between 320 and 480. You can say min width and max width, and then it will only work within that range if you want to be very specific about it. You can also do resolution. So if you have maybe alternate photos, and some of the photos are really high res and they'll look really good on a 4K high refresh rate monitor, I don't know. But on mobile, no one's going to see that because no one's got a 4K iPhone, I don't think. And it's going to be harder for a phone to load it using data. So you want to use low resolution images for your phone. So you can say, hey, if the resolution is above this much, then display my really cool photos. And if it's below that, then display my terrible photos. You can also do landscape and orientation, or landscape and portrait. So you can say orientation landscape, and you can change your design so it looks good horizontal or vertical. You can also do browser support. So if you have something that's like cutting edge that you're doing in your CSS, you can say at support instead of at media, and then the thing that you want it to be able to support. So here I just said display dash grid, and then it will only work in, they'll pull up this code for things that can use grid, and then you can have an alternative layout for older browsers above. So how do you know if something can be supported in a browser? You can go into the MDN and you can go down to the bottom of whatever it is you're using. So here I went to grid, and it will show you all of the browsers, their newest versions, and if it works on them, it'll have a little check mark, and if it doesn't, it'll have a little X. So you can see here that all of the updated browsers have check marks on them, so grid should work for everything. It won't work for someone who has had their laptop since 1995 and has never updated Google Edge or Firefox or whatever, like it has a really old version of that browser, maybe it won't work. But if everyone's up to date, then it should all work. So this is a backup in case you want to have alternative designs for different aged browsers. You can also do and, which allows you to mix and match these. So you can have it break at a specific width and at a specific resolution. So maybe your really nice images only show up on really long, really high definition monitors. You can also do or statements. So you can say either the screen is really small or the resolution is really small, and then show my bad images. So a comma will do that instead. So instead of saying and min width, you can say comma min width, and it will do either or. So breakpoints are wherever your design starts breaking down when you start adjusting the screen. So common breakpoints are these. They're set for specific devices. So this is a breakpoint, this would be a breakpoint, this would be a breakpoint. In ye olden days, a few years ago, you would make a breakpoint for each of these, but I would recommend first starting out using those relative units and then looking to see where your design breaks and then making a breakpoint there instead of bespokely making a layout for each of these. Try to make your layout as flexible as possible and then adjust within that. But if you don't want to have to fuss that much, you can also do traditional breakpoints at these different sizes. Also, make sure that you stay up to date on what the current breakpoints are, because these are based off of the devices that are currently available. And if we start doing things like only putting things on big smartwatches that go on your wrist, then you'll need to know what those sizes are too. Also, you should probably, it's industry standard to start designing for mobile first. So you have your CSS start with mobile, and then you do your breakpoints for larger devices. But you can go either way on it. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind if you're doing responsive websites is keeping an eye on your files, because a computer that is attached to the internet, it's like hardwired in, is going to be downloading things way faster than a tablet that's using data or a really old iPhone that's using data. So you need to keep an eye on your file sizes. Don't be just downloading 4K images from Unsplash and straight up uploading them to the internet, because it's going to take forever for them to load. Adjust your images before you put them on your website. So they shouldn't be larger than 72 ppi. Keep an eye on that number. As screens become nicer, that may get larger. 500 kilobits for large images. Kilobytes, yeah. It's small. Make it small. You should keep it small. Anything larger than this is unnecessary. Keep it small. For images that don't have to be big, like icons or just like smaller things, 200 is good. If you have a large image that you're going to have to crop down anyway once you put it inside your code, like you're going to have, you're going to have to like readjust it to be portrait when it's landscape. Do that before you upload it. That way there's less data for the computer to have. If you already know you're going to crop it down beforehand and upload it. Use file types that are good for web. SVGs are great. They're great for icons. They take up very little data. WebP is really popular. You can export that from Photoshop. It's one of the export settings now. It works fantastic for web. It's terrible to use on a computer itself, but it's great for loading for web, and it can do transparency, which I love. JPEG is also good because it has a low file size, but it can get kind of crunchy. WebPs are nice because they can get you low file sizes while retaining quality. GIF is another one for low file sizes, but gets you crunchy, but can do animation. And then PNGs, if you gotta do a PNG, you can, but just keep an eye on that file size. Accessibility is also important, so as you're scaling things up and scaling things down for different sizes of devices, keep in mind people being able to read them. If you've ever had a relative of yours who's had to like go in and manually change the settings on their phone so they can actually read the website that they're on, or they have to do this 8,000 times, you know how annoying that is for them. So keep in mind as you're working the idea of accessibility. So when you're working with images, if it is integral to understanding the website, you have to put that image inside of the HTML and not the CSS, even though maybe the CSS is easier to style. The HTML will allow you to use alt text, so that someone who is using a screen reader who can't visually see that image knows what that image is and can understand the content of your website. For alt text, make sure you're being succinct and to the point and that you're being specific. Don't use picture of or illustration of. The screen reader will say image and then the alt text, so you don't have to include that. Keep it under 100 characters. They don't have all day to read an essay about how really cool the picture is that you have on there. Get to the point. And if the text has image on it, like if it's a meme or if it's a comic with a thought bubble, include that text in there too. Make sure you're using semantic language. So whenever you can replace a div with a section or figure or article, anytime that you can replace a div with nav or header, main, footer, do that as much as you can. When you're using text, don't make everything a paragraph. Use headers, H1, H2, H3. Instead of using span, use bold or B or I, bold italic, or strong or emphasis. And that will just help people know what the meaning of certain things is and how they're supposed to be interpreted when they're using screen readers. Make sure you keep colors readable. When things are backlit, they're way harder to see and you have to keep way more track of if the colors are vibrating off of each other, and people are like spending a long time looking at these bright lights that are flashing at them. So keep your color contrast high. Make sure it's at least 4.5 to 1 if that doesn't make any sense to you. You can use color contrast checkers on the internet. Also, avoid black text on a white background. It causes a lot of eye strain and people aren't going to want to be on your website for very long, especially on mobile. So use just like a dark gray and a light white, or a light gray, dark gray, light gray. You can get it really close to black and white, but just try very hard to not like flash people with a bright light. And then if you're ever worried about the color contrast, or if you're worried if you've hit accessibility, you can use digital checkers. There's like 8,000 of them on the internet that are free. I'm going to show you a couple of them. So here is Adobe's color checker. So it's free with your Adobe account. You just go to Adobe Color and you can go to, it'll start with the color wheel. You can go to accessibility tools and you can see if the color contrast is enough. So you can put your colors in and you can say, and it will say, hey, your color contrast is 5 to 1. So that works. That would work for a website because we want 4.5 to 1. And it will tell you like, this is not good enough. Like if I do some sort of change, it'll tell me that it sucks. And it will recommend contrast change suggestions. So you can say, do this. And now I see that it's 5 to 1. Awesome. That works for me. What was my earlier one? It doesn't want to do it. That's fine. What if I do a terrible one? Oh no, give me a bad one. I want to show a bad one. Okay, so here it's giving me a red X. It's like, no, this is unreadable. Yes, this is absolutely unreadable. And it will give me something to check it out. And look, beautiful. Saves you a lot of time. Okay, for accessibilities, W3 works a lot with web accessibility. And here they've got a huge list of free accessibility checkers. They're all good. Some of them will have a limit. They'll let you use it like 5 times before you have to start buying. But then as soon as you do that, just click on one of the other 400 of them and it will tell you if your website is accessible. I use this plugin for Chrome because it's got unlimited checkers and it's really easy to use. So if I go to my travel blog and I go up to my extensions and I hit my accessibility checker, do fast pass, and it will say, look, I've got 0 failed instances. So I have enough color contrast, I have enough semantics, there's alt text on my images, so far and so forth. And if I need to go in and change it, I can just hit start over and it will check it again. So that's pretty nice. Beep. Okay, so today we talked about relative units, min, max, flex, and grid for making your site responsive. Once that breaks down, you can use @media to change your design for wherever your design doesn't work. We also talked about optimizing your files so they can be easily read and loaded no matter the device or the way people are accessing your site. And we also talked about accessibility, making sure that everyone has access to your site no matter what device or technology they're using. So that's it. Next time during class, we're going to talk about Project 1. No more in-class assignments. We're moving on to projects now. Get excited. I will see you in class. Have a good one.